For everyone waiting, we'll be getting started in just a moment. The October 2024 Policy and Equity Committee meeting. We're going to start by going around the room and doing some introductions. Rob, you want to start for us and then we'll go around? Rob, technician.
Okay, Angie Maddox, Board Health Manager.
Jim Carlson, board member.
Ben Lindy, board member.
Kendra Matt, board member.
Dan Hoying, general counsel.
Stephanie Scott, assistant general counsel.
Jessica Shelley, Director of Student Dining Services. Erin Invis, Cincinnati Federation of Teachers Field Representative.
Emily Bell, ASME Local 232.
Michael Banks, Cincinnati AI Catalyst.
Welcome, everyone. Excited to have you here. I'm excited about this meeting because we've got a little bit of structure underneath us. And so if people look at the agenda, you'll see it's got the same sections we talked about last time. We're going to get back to our legal team moving through their triennial policy review. So we have some policies there teed up for the first 20 minutes. We also have in section 3, a calendar of topics that board members have requested that we look at over the course of the rest of calendar year 2024. So we're going to work through those items in that next section. As Phyllis and I were meeting to talk about the agenda, we did leave this 20-minute flex section at the end, just to take on any other, reactive topics that we need. As we worked on this month's agenda, we felt like everything that could go there was actually captured in number 3. So I think what we'll do is section 3 will wind up being closer to 60 minutes, but then we'll still have 10 minutes hearing of the public at the end. And we're going to get everybody out of here as close to 11 o'clock as possible. So hopefully this looks familiar. Anybody have any questions about the agenda or anything feel missing today? Okay, if not, we're going to turn it over to the General Counsel's team to hear about our standing policy review.
Great, thank you. Good morning. First policy that that we're looking at this morning relates to field trips, and actually board member Mapp had some recommendations for this policy, particularly with ensuring that information was shared with parents in a permission form or permission slip fashion in advance, including information about so that the parent is sure that they know the location, purpose of the field trip, how students will be transported to and from, activities planned during the field trip, and then clarifying that also applies to field trips that are sort of extracurricular related outside of the regular school day. Finally, we updated some of the language that relates to conflicts of interest in scheduling field trips. The language hadn't been looked at for some time and included that, in exchange for scheduling a field trip, you weren't allowed to take things like microwave ovens and computers. Now we updated that to say anything of value, essentially.
No microwaves.
Got it. So mostly some updating aside from the request from board member Matt. Invite you to, yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. And so just wanting to, again, as
General Counsel stated, making sure that parents are informed and knowledgeable. And I think we do a really great job as it pertains to the field trip aspect of things, but wanting to make sure that we included those extracurricular activities that may occur after school or outside of the actual school day, so that parents are knowledgeable about the activities that they're involved in, and essentially giving consent to engage in those activities. And we also wanted to make sure that this was in no way to limit or create inequities within our students having access to different opportunities, but again, wanting to ensure that parents are as informed as possible.
Thank you. Kendra, anything from you, Jim?
Kendra, does the language as it's proposed here achieve what you were hoping for?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. I don't have any other feedback or commentary on the first one. Anything else? So we're good to recommend this for adoption?
Move forward.
Yeah, and so this would, just so I'm clear on next steps, this would go into likely a consent agenda for
28th.
28th. I think we have, we have not prior to this calendar year really done the consent agenda voting. And some resolutions have been bundled, for example, reimbursements in lieu of. Some have not been bundled, for example, the AI policy. So I think one thing we should just figure out together is like, when do we want to list something separately and when do we want to put it with? This feels like it is a fairly minor set of changes and like cleanup work. I'm fine to include it in the consent agenda. Does anybody feel different? No? Okay, great.
Sounds
We'll do
good.
that. But like, we just, as we go through these, let's make that just a point of clarity.
Great.
All right, moving on.
So I'll introduce Stephanie Scott on this. The only thing I'll introduce before she starts, earlier in I would say probably 23, maybe even going back to 22, as we were going through our 3-year review of policies, a previous policy committee determined that we used to have 2 sets of employment policies: the 3000 series, which applied to professional staff, teachers, and administrators, essentially, and the 4000 series, which applied to classified staff. So this would be civil service folks. There was a determination made. First of all, most of those policies, 90% of them, overlap verbatim, and it seemed to us to modernize our policies and move forward that we would combine those into one set of policies, noting differences where applicable. And so we are almost complete with that work. I think we have 7 policies left to finish the combination of those 2 chapters. And so Stephanie has 4 of those, or two and 2
Right.
to present this morning.
And so the first one would be the creating a position. So technically it's B and D. I know we normally get in order on the agenda. So what we would be doing is basically rescinding 4111 and keeping 3111, but basically again combining those 2 policies into one, keeping the 3111. So it's creating a position. We didn't have any changes. This is one of the policies that was verbatim in both versions. So really, that's just a recommendation is to rescind the 4111 and keep 3111. Or are there any questions on that one?
To summarize and make sure I was following correctly, this is part of an overall cleanup. Feels like it has a judgy valence to it, which I'm not wild about. The reorganization feels like it's strategic. I don't think that's true either, but this is just clear. Modernization, there's our word. Yes. So this is modernizing our policies by fixing some of these divides that no longer serve us.
Right.
But no other
Eventually, we
substantive.
won't have a separate category for just professional classified. It's just an employee overall category. Yes.
Any questions or concerns from Kendra or from Jim? All right, we're gonna keep moving.
So we'll move that one forward. And then the other one in this same kind of general or similar situation is policy 3242 and 4242. The difference with these, the topic was similar, but a lot of the language was different. But again, these policies hadn't been reviewed in a long time, so they had a lot of outdated information in there. So what we determined on this one is to rescind 3242 and keep primarily the language in 4242 with a couple of just, again, updating the language to make it more coherent with the rest of our policies. So you'll notice on 4242, we added a line that the superintendent may plan and implement a program on in-service training for employees. So again, it was just updating that.
And the only thing I'd add is there are, of course, more specific professional development obligations in all of our collective
Yes.
bargaining agreements. This would not in any way impact what's been agreed to with the unions. It's just sort of recognizing that we will have professional development within the district.
And that's captured in the last kind of paragraph of the policy. So again, any questions on those changes? But again, it would be rescinding policy 3242, adopting 4242, with just the minor changes as you see track there.
Any questions from Kendra or Jim?
Looking over everything.
And take your time. We're ahead of schedule and there's no rush.
Yes. Like, I guess technically it would be rescinding this one. We're just adopting the language, yeah. And technically, we would be rescinding 4242. We're making them all into the 3000 series. So the policy would remain under 3242, but we adopted primarily the language that was from 4242. So that's a little bit confusing. As we combine both these categories, they all become part of the 3000
Okay.
series. So technically, the 3242 policy number is remaining.
Mhm.
But for a point of clarification, we adopted most of the language from the original
And transferred it
42,
over
40,
to
yes,
the-
and
okay.
yes.
Okay.
I sort of see this as something that could be bundled in the consent agenda.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
All of these so far, I think, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Kendra, any questions or concerns on your end?
So the only question is in the sentence that states the board may reimburse employees for the costs incurred in participation therein, subject to prior approval of the superintendent. So that will come through in the superintendent's report. Is that, or what is this sentence stating?
So there is a
Where?
budget for some of the unions have within their collective bargaining agreements a budget for professional development opportunities, especially those that are outside of the district, traveling to a conference, participating in a training, let's say, OSBA training or whatever. And so I think that this mostly refers to that. It would be a cost reimbursement that's approved by the board in the same way that other costs are approved.
Mhm.
So if the costs exceed certain thresholds, then they have to go through the treasurer's report. Otherwise, they're just a part of a pre-approved budget.
Okay. We good to go?
Okay, moving on.
Conscious of the fact that the treasurer is online and
Oh.
making sure I get that.
Anything you
Dan?
wanna-
Can I add something? Good morning, everybody.
Morning, Jen.
There is an application for professional development that has to go through prior to the person going out for professional development. So it goes through a series of checks for making sure it's aligned with the district's goals and the individual professional development plan, as well as the funding that's available and the appropriate funding used, whether it's a grant or a general fund. So there's a process in place is what I'm trying to say.
Okay.
Okay, so no request for additional language, you're just clarifying the process.
I'm assuming so. The document that's online that's attached isn't the one you're talking about. It's a different document, so I can't see the language, but
Oh, no,
it
okay.
sounds like it.
Let's try and upload it. Well, if you go to the board docs, it's policy 4242. It's primarily the language that we're adopting today. It's not many, it's pretty much, and it's, if you're able to
Except
have.
that the document that's loaded is 4232.
Oh, I mean, I'm sorry, under the board policies, under current board policies, if you pull up policy
Okay, I got
42.
it. Okay, I'll take a look.
Yeah, the field trip one is also, board doc seems to be a little off. The field trips one's also not the correct one. It's superintendent evaluation.
Hmm,
See that?
okay.
Yep, so.
We're gonna try to do that on the fly.
Take your time.
Well, that will take a second.
Should we come back in?
We can.
So I think, oh, do we have one more then? The
We do.
5330?
And we have a guest for this one.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm, by the way, I'm very happy to just hang out for a second if you want to make those edits now. Or we can go to 5330, or we can come back. You tell me what's most helpful.
So it's the documents I think are correctly uploaded for 4242. It says that it's mislabeled perhaps, but it's the same document that is loaded on board docs is what we're looking at here this morning. And the language from current 4242 would be, oh, I'm sorry. Language from current 4242 would be primarily adopted for and become and replace current policy 3242.
The only thing that I might add would be the superintendent or treasurer, because the superintendent doesn't typically deal with the development of the treasurer's office employees. But I don't think it's a big deal, but
That sounds like a nice edit.
And treasurer
Mhm.
or treasurer,
Or treasurer, yeah.
certainly. We can do that.
Is that the only change, Jen, that you would have for now?
I mean, you could put subject to prior approval of the superintendent or treasurer to ensure that the funding is taken care of. But I don't know if it's necessary. I don't want to wordsmith it to death.
Well, I think the fact that we're using the word may gives us that discretion, but if you feel it's important to be explicit.
I think it's fine. It's been that way for however many years.
Yes, since 2009.
20 years. I think we're fine.
Okay, but we will add the or treasurer at the top.
So if we're good on that modernization piece, we'll move to 5330.
Yes.
So I'm not pushing it too quickly.
Not at all.
Okay.
This is a policy where we have a guest, Angie Maddox. Oh, there she is. Who supports our school health and supervises the school nurses that are in our buildings, is here today and brought this to our attention, I don't know, a month or so ago. The change here relates to the administration of medication policy, and specifically that the policy has always provided that if a parent gives approval to a student and that approval is on file with the school, the student may self-administer prescription meds to themselves. So if they have a prescription and the parent is comfortable and gives permission to the school has it on file, that the student is able to carry prescription meds with them and self-administer. So obviously requires parent approval and that it's on file with the school, but that's been in our policies for some time. The anomaly, I think, was that there was no such provision for over-the-counter meds. And so the addition we're proposing is to say that the same rule would apply, that if a parent gives permission to a student and the school has that approval on file, that a student may self-administer over-the-counter meds to themselves. This could be, Tylenol, it could be But again, it has to be something that the parent has pre-approved and that the school has on file. I point to my friend Angie Maddox to fill in where I've left off.
You did great. You did perfectly. Yeah, we have some students, especially high school. It happens more frequently than elementary, where, the The students can self-administer. And it was brought to my attention at a high school where a student has pretty severe migraines. And her prescribed treatment is to immediately take ibuprofen. It's such a large high school, her mom would like her to carry it with her so that there's not a delay in her receiving that medication. And I think it would reduce missed class time if, if students in this situation especially, but I'm sure there's others, if they could carry their medication with them with approval from their parent and their pediatrician.
Thank you, Angie. And board members, questions?
No question or comment, though. I suffered from migraines in high school, and so I think it's a good idea. It's great. So.
Thank you, Jim. Kendra?
I have some, but just not at this moment, so.
No, take your time.
yeah.
I was going to say exactly the same thing that Jim said. So I have no other wisdom to share. It's not uncommon.
And I was going to note in the policy currently how we have it as well, based on what Angie just confirmed. Also, we have it stipulated that it would be 7 through 12 that will be self-administering. K through the elementary would still be through the school personnel for over the counter.
When I said a second ago that it was not uncommon, I was not referring to migraines. I was referring to Jim saying things that are smarter than the things that I say.
So I do have one question. So I definitely agree. I actually did suffer from migraines. But I am curious to know, how do we, I guess, counter against, and not to say that this will happen, but how do we counter against maybe students that are carrying their over-the-counter medicine, giving it to other students that may experience migraines or anything of the sort? How do we, I guess, put language in there to counter against the
Great question.
distribution of other students coming in contact with these medications?
There is a stipulation under number 3 where it basically explicitly says this. So in some ways it's board policy. So if a student would do that, I mean, again, it would be a code of conduct violation type thing. So it'd be similar, to any other kind of similar infraction that would already be in place. But we have explicitly said that it's supposed to be only for the student, that it's intended for.
We could add a sentence that says like failure to come give it insert appropriate language.
Yeah.
Will
It's a
be
violation of the code of conduct.
Yeah.
Also, again, that student has to have something on file with the school that says, my parent has given me permission to take this medication. So if I give it to another student, that student's caught with that medication and they don't have the same approval on file. That's how we would know that, that student's not authorized to have the medication.
Okay. And are these forms, okay, it says is subject to 2 renewal periods. So is that still an annual type of update for those forms to be submitted?
Good point to
Okay.
Angie on that.
Okay. Thank you.
The other thing is, it is state law. So the piece with respect to prescription meds that has been in the policy for some time is state law that we are required to make to allow students to self-administer with permission from their parent and on file with the school. The anomaly was, it just seemed, and again, this was what the parent, I think, was pointing out. So if my kid has a prescription med, they're allowed to take that around, but an over-the-counter, presumably safer, less risky medication, they're not. And so that's what we're trying to correct here with respect to this change.
Okay. And so in terms of location, where they're able to take it, they're able to take it in a classroom or wherever they are experiencing maybe the
Where they are. That's how
Okay.
it's been done with the prescription medications. And I think commonly students with diabetes can sometimes carry their medications and things with them. And I've seen students carry their EpiPens if they have a severe allergy. But they administer wherever they need to.
Okay. So I think I'm fine with the changes to the policy. I think I have other concerns about just the administration of medication that's not connecting to what you all are proposing. And so I know that we have like, I think it's just aligning with like maybe following the 504 plans, making sure that, I know that we have students with sickle cell. I know we outlined individuals with diabetes, but making sure that there's necessary language and supports in place for those students too, to ensure that their accommodations are being followed and things of that sort. So again, I have different concerns, but I don't want to take up the time too much here because it doesn't align with what you all are proposing now. That makes sense.
Welcome those additional feedback. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I'm just, my thing would be about just location in terms of taking medication, how medication is being documented appropriately. And I know that it's talked about the schools pretty much are at discretion of coming up with procedures. But wondering if we are able to establish some type of uniformity across the district to ensure that there is consistency with the expectation in terms of how medication is being administered. So I would probably like to connect more with you since you are the expert in this and just kind of, share some of my thoughts with you and then you can give me your feedback. Okay, thank you.
And I would just add that I think this is an area where we want consistency too. This is not an area where schools should be differing much from school to school. We use the same forms, same rules apply from school to school. So.
Okay, but I thought I read in here, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that I read somewhere in here where it spoke about, obviously we have the policy, but the schools have the leeway to implement the type of procedures that they would want to based off of their school.
I mean, this is a pretty prescriptive policy in terms of telling the schools what our expectations are. We also, because of the oversight Angie provides, as well as the health department, again, we expect them to be using the same forms, et cetera.
Okay.
You're welcome to jump in here.
Yeah, it should be pretty consistent across the district. If there are any discrepancies, I would love to talk more about that. Because I also want uniformity and I want to make sure everyone's documenting the same and following exactly what the doctor prescribes even. And making sure it's spelled out correctly. Our nurses do a great job of making sure that health plans are in place where it's appropriate. My experience with Cincinnati Children's especially is writing those orders. They're very good at spelling out exactly what that looks like during the school day. Yeah,
Okay.
but I would love to talk more about it though.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you.
So just for the purposes of next steps, Kendra, did you, I think you may have said this and I just missed it. Very happy to hold this until
will
this
hold it,
conversation
yeah.
can happen.
Mhm.
And so we won't pass this on through the
Correct.
next meeting,
Mhm.
but we'll keep this. And then this is a note, I think for Phyllis, can you just keep this on the agenda for next time? And we can come back to it.
Just one question about that, Ben. Is there any sense of urgency that's needed for the student, for the students to be able to self-administer? If we're holding it up for another time?
So it's holding up the over-the-counter portion. Yeah, I really want her to carry her medication, but I want to follow the process too.
Is there any way we can do both? Like,
Yeah,
if
that's
we-
what I was gonna ask.
Yeah,
Yeah, if we was able to send it through for that said purpose, but then revisit it to, make sure that other things are in alignment as well.
We can absolutely do that. And it would not be the first time, or I'm sure the last time, where we have multiple amendments to a policy throughout the year. So yeah, that's fine.
Sounds like a plan.
we did my
Yeah,
old
like-
job. We used to have this saying, which is where the logic stops, we stop, and so I like this because I think it gets this, does the right thing in the near term and creates chance to like talk about the other important issues. And so I think that sounds good. Okay, great. Anything else on 5330?
Any preference on this one going through the consent agenda versus the
I go either
regular
way.
agenda?
What do you all think?
I'm happy to bundle it in the consent agenda, provided that the communication of this to the district is done gets done properly. I don't think it necessarily has to be done through our board meeting to get that information to the schools.
Parents aware.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm happy to bundle.
Okay.
I'm happy to bundle it.
Will do.
Easy enough? Okay, great, wonderful. So we're, I think, finished with our standing policy cycle review. Anything general counsel's office we're missing?
Nope, thank
from
you.
Section 1. So we'll pick this again next month with another round of policies, keep making our way through the whole list every 3 years. Now on to the next section. And we have, I think, 3 items that were in discussion in past meetings, but we wanted to give them some more time. First was 8515, which is wellness, mental health, and social emotional wellness. I think, am I right in thinking, Kendra, you wanted some time to ask some questions about this one, or were there some revisions that were done?
So I don't think there were any additional revisions, but Dan and I did have an opportunity to speak about the proposal of making the additions that I was speaking about with the social and emotional wellness and mental health, making that a standalone policy. And I believe that's why Ms. Shelley is here as well to kind of speak about that as well. Correct?
I'm here to answer any questions about the current wellness policy
Okay.
and changes that were proposed. I don't have any input into the mental health, but I know that when Ms. House and I were speaking, that we strongly believe that a standalone policy would be best for implementation for our students to support them.
Okay.
That's exactly where we are. So the request for the policy committee would be to move this wellness policy forward as is. This relates mostly to the food service, the physical sort of wellness of students, and then per board member Mapp's request to do a mental wellness policy. Manisha House, and she has a team that she's convening to try to help put that together with your help. So that would be brought back to the committee as soon as it's ready to be presented.
So with that being said, as it pertains to this policy, I don't have any additional feedback or concerns about it.
So then, I hear 2 things. One is that the proposed updated 8515 will go on our next board meeting, I think consent agenda. No, or should we?
I defer a little bit to
We could,
our what do you have a suggestion about that?
No, I think that I appreciate you guys taking the time to review the changes that will actually strengthen and demonstrate what we're already doing in our district. So I think it's ready to go forward. Thank you.
Does it need to be separately approved by the board, in your opinion, or can it be bundled in the consent agenda?
I think consent agenda would be appropriate.
Okay, thank you. I vote for consent agenda.
Yeah, some efficiency wins and really like it's been in the committee report for the presentation that we did 2 meetings ago, I think, or 2 meetings ago. Yeah. And so I think we're okay. That was thing 1 that I heard. And then thing 2, we're going to have some follow up on a mental wellness policy. And I think we could use some of that, flex time we got whenever you would like to do that. I think we could do that in November, we could do that in December, 2025. So then would you let me know, Kendra?
Yeah, and I'll also, once I have more information from the Mrs. House team that she's put together and us being able to collaborate, I can definitely give you more feedback in terms of a timeline.
Great. And I think we can be very, very flexible. So then the next one is dress and grooming.
I just wanted to say I support I think the mental wellness idea is great. I support that. So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
And then the follow-up here, Kendra, can you remind me on the dress and grooming piece?
Just give me a second to find.
I'm trying to find mine too.
While you're looking for that, I'll just add that there's 1 new paragraph that's been added to the policy. So the paragraph, the second to last paragraph is what's been added new for this meeting. Consistent with the minutes from last meeting.
So we have consistent with district's wellness policy, dressing and grooming procedures for students should embrace students from different cultures, students with different body types and economic circumstances in a welcoming and non-judgmental way. Dress and grooming standards and expectations for students should be reflective of the school's dress and grooming expectations for staff. Students shall not suffer an academic or removal penalty for violation of this policy.
Yes. I do have one other question about this. I guess my concern is how do we uphold the policy? So no, we're not talking about, removing students from the classrooms. We want to ensure that they have that class time. But how do we is there language that we can put in place to actually uphold the policy? So if a student is not not presenting with appropriate attire, what are some things that we can consider, or is that something that we defer to for the actual schools?
No, sorry. And I was trying to bring up the code of conduct. It's still a code of conduct violation. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean that it's not a code of conduct violation. So other and not our behavioral expert. I'd love to have Manisha House or somebody here, but I mean, detention is not a school removal consequence. Friday school, Saturday school, those sorts of things are not school removal. What a school removal consequence is that when instruction is happening, you're removing a student out of school. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
Right.
There are, again, the folks who work through PBIS and discipline, there are innumerable ways of sort of enforcing the code of conduct that are not only taking a kid out of class. And that's the only consequence that would be off limits
Okay.
under this new policy.
Okay. So as you see it, you feel that this is a solid reflection of how the policy should read? Or is
Yes, I am.
Okay.
Do you want to jump in here?
How it reads in the code of conduct right now, it says dress code is a decision made at the school level. Failure to follow the dress code may result in a code of conduct violation based on administrative discretion. Violations of the dress code will not result in academic consequences nor exclusionary consequences, i.e. out of school suspension. Which
Okay,
is
so there's
reflected.
that alignment there.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
To go up like 2 pages. Sorry. Yeah. I was just looking to give some examples of other types of consequences that can be administered in lieu of. And I note that we have several teachers on the, or representatives of teachers who are not speaking up.
We invite you into the discussion.
Yeah, so other lawful privileges, office referrals, detention.
Sometimes what schools do, and the easiest thing is that they have like a closet with T-shirts
Mhm.
and they can just say, here,
Yeah.
your top, you have on just a spaghetti strap top and you need to have more coverage than that.
Mhm.
So you're not going home, but you have to wear
Right.
this T-shirt.
Mhm. Okay.
I mean, that's what most schools, I think, have in place. Sometimes that creates another problem. But if they can show that it's in the code of conduct and have that as an alignment, I think that's fine.
Mhm. Okay.
I think it's easier in elementary schools than high schools.
Mhm. Yeah.
High schools, they want more say and freedom.
Thank you. And I was thinking that as well, but I didn't know if that was an option. Yeah. Okay.
I had a
Well-
question in this policy where you use the word staff. Does that include teachers? In this?
Mhm.
So I was just curious, each school has its own ability to have a dress code policy or dress code standards for teachers. Is that correct? It's school by school?
No,
Okay, and
the only thing that contractually, the only thing is that teachers must dress professionally and have professional grooming. No, not dress professionally, have professional grooming. That means they need to come to school clean and in clothes appropriate for their job.
Mhm.
okay,
We went through this, we've gone through this many, many times.
Mhm.
And I mean, I even made a whole board of this is in your code and this isn't. There were some principals who wanted people to wear hose and they couldn't wear gym shoes. And I mean, there were some crazy things that people were asking of teachers that weren't appropriate for what they were teaching.
So there, you said there's you have a.
We have contract language.
Well, no, you said you made a board of examples.
Uh-huh.
I'd love to see that.
I
That
don't
might
know
be.
if I have anyone that can- Hey, okay.
The reason I'm asking is I'm new on the board and I've been making school visits. And I have seen some teachers and been introduced to some teachers that I felt like, wow, you can wear cutoff shorts and Crocs as a teacher, and it's like, whoa, I guess that's okay. But I don't know. I mean, I didn't make any comments. I just had some observations that seemed like, is it meeting the grooming expectation? I don't know but I'd
I
love
think
to.
that's a hard thing to police. I don't know.
It's okay. I understand all that, but that board might be interesting as a way for people to understand what might be the best. So I don't know. Okay, thank you.
And there are some principals who in their own school's handbook, they try to rewrite policy. And so that's one of the things that we always have to do is making sure that they're not rewriting policy within their thing, like no gym shoes are permitted. Or you can only wear blue jeans on Friday if you pay $5 or something like that. And so we don't want to get into, it's okay if you pay us to wear those clothes because they already don't. But when people call me like people wear ripped up jeans, I'm like, I don't really think that's professional grooming if your clothes are ripped. So I don't know. Crocs, some people do because of their feet being on their feet. These new buildings are a lot of them are on concrete slabs. It's different than when I was in the old buildings with wooden floors, teachers' legs and feet and hips and ankles did not get as tired and damaged as what they are now. But teachers have a high incident of foot problems, ankle problems, knee problems. And it's everybody. And so it really does create a bigger problem when you switch over to concrete floors.
Thank you.
Okay, good discussion. So
I'm good to
You're okay with this
Yeah,
one?
as long as it aligns with the code of conduct, then I'm fine with that.
Great.
And
So I think on 5511, we can also put this through on the consent agenda, absent any objections from my colleagues. And we are solving the world's problems. Anything else on 5511? We're good, moving on. Okay, we're on section 3, topic A, which are items continued from last month. We're on Roman 3, which is 1240 superintendent evaluation policy. I'd like to do something slightly unusual, but not super unusual, which is just take a 5-minute recess. I just want to explain why. I got feedback from Eve this morning, and I got feedback from Mary last night after the workday ended. And I haven't read it carefully enough to have like a good, meaningful conversation about it. And I would like to make sure their feedback's part of our discussion. So I think if I have 5 minutes, I can carefully go through their emails and then try to have a more focused discussion that pulls in the perspectives of all the other board members. So absent any concerns, I'm just going to take a 5-minute break. You can stay here, you can wander around, you can eat more food, but we will pick up again in 5 minutes. Okay, thanks.
Oh, okay.
Okay, thanks, everybody. I appreciate that. I think this will let us have a more focused and more impactful discussion. And I'm grateful that colleagues like Eve and Mary and really lots of people took the time to put their comments in writing, share them with me. I want to make sure their perspective is a part of our conversation. Let me.
Yes, okay, sorry.
Should we not be live so we can do that? Good, great. Okay, great. I've been in the other room for the last 10 minutes. I can't speak to what was going on in here. I also think I'd like for everybody who is in the room and watching in the future to have access to the documents that people sent me so people can see those also. So Phyllis, and Rob, I might ask for your help with this. So Eve sent feedback this morning. And Stephanie, it looks like you're on this email. Dan, you're on this email, but Phyllis is not. Would you forward it to Phyllis? And then Phyllis, can you do whatever you need with it to get it to something that could get posted on board docs? Or Dan can do it. Great. I just want to make sure that like if people want to follow along to the recording, they can see anything that we could see.
Okay.
I also got one from Mary. Did she include other? Dan, did you put you on that?
No.
All right. So Mary, I think, sent it to the three of us. So I'm going to forward this to Dan just so we all keep all this in the same place. Is that okay? All right. And then other things in my notes are things that came up at the board meeting on Monday. And so I think then everybody will have access to everything. Okay. So I want to just be thoughtful about our time too. So after we have about a half hour left. I think we maybe spend 15 minutes max on this because I want to make sure we can get to Jim's Innovation Council policy. Kendra, I want to make sure we can talk about audit and we'd have the transportation follow-up that we had from last time. And then have 10 minutes for hearing of the public at the end. Okay. If we don't finish all of this time, we will carry it over next month. Okay. So when I went through the feedback from Monday, and I know that I had to leave partway through that to go to the October 7th memorial, I went back and listened to the discussion that I missed. And so that should be a part of what is captured here. But what I did is I tried to keep track of the different types of issues that people were raising with respect to the policy, and I grouped them into a couple categories. The first category is one where it seems like there's all consensus and all 7 board members either agree or they haven't told me that they disagree. And I'd like to list those out. And then for council's office, as we work towards a proposed version, I think all three of those can be in there. So thing one is the date change. Everybody likes the idea that we're doing this in the fall, that we are having a final evaluation by that first week in October so that it can reflect final student outcomes information from the previous school year. We'll keep the paragraph in there about what has to be done by law by March 1st so that it's really clear that we're doing everything that we're supposed to be doing. But I think I'm grateful that we already have one big win on the board, which is, I think, putting this evaluation at a time of year that makes sense. And again, this has got to get approved by the board, but Brandon said in the meeting, he agreed with that. Eve in her notes said that she agreed with that. Nobody has voiced concerns. So thank you. Second, there is universal support for a collaborative goal setting process, a process that involves input from the superintendent and that also involves input from board members. I appreciate the language that council's office added in preparation for this meeting. So that feels like a real win. So the two points of agreement. Third, one of the things that the old 1240 does not say that the proposed 1240 does say is that the board has to approve the superintendent's goals for the year in a public meeting. And that's also something where there has been no pushback and several board members have said that they like that part of the new policy. So I offer those as the three things where there's some real alignment: date, collaborative goal setting, goals voted on public by a date certain. We then get into issues, and I think there are probably 5 of them where I think there are people in different perspectives. And I think my hope for this particular meeting is that those areas of disagreement get airtime, and that the 3 of us get to engage around how we feel about those issues. We'll get as many as we can in the 10, 15 minutes. And then we relay that back to the board, and I'm sure we'll have some additional discussion with colleagues. Is that as just a framework work? Okay. Okay. So first area of disagreement. So the proposed draft says that the goals need to focus on student outcomes. And at least one board member, Eve, in the meeting on Monday, wanted to leave the weighting of that flexible. So the draft says 75% of the evaluation will turn on measures of student outcomes. It's not saying that's the only thing, but it's saying 75% of the final evaluation rating will turn on how students do. I feel pretty strongly that it needs to be 75%. But I'm one board member. Eve is another board member. And I would love to hear what Kendra and Jim have to say.
Why 75%? Not that I'm opposed to it. I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think the most important job we have is doing right by kids, you know, and I think that it's one thing to say that's what we're doing. It's another thing to check to see if the things that we're doing are actually having the impact that we want. And to me, it feels like because of that collaborative goal setting process, like these are going to be things that are both ambitious but also feasible. You know, like I think the example in the board meeting Monday was like setting a graduation rate goal of 99%. That's absurd, you know, and like I'm fine to include language in there about the goals needing to be feasible. But if we've done that, and we're not holding the superintendent accountable for the vast majority of that evaluation on the outcomes relating to children that we decided at the beginning of the year were feasible, what are we doing? You know, like it's not the only thing. There's lots of financial stuff matters, you know, community engagement matters, but yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. My one suggestion around that is that because so much of the review is based on the basically it'll be based on the report card that comes out in the fall and the goals that we set. I think it might be good to have a check-in like it's 9 months or 6 months to see how it's going, rather than have it all come at the end and maybe try to avoid a surprise for everybody. So my suggestion would be there would be some sort of an interim time to check in on things to see how they're going.
And I think the council added that, right, in the draft for today that was posted. If that looks sufficient, I also make things up sometimes.
So there's an addition on part 3.
But
I see. I didn't put my piece of paper on. I'm sorry. Is it in there, Dan? Oh, yeah, midterm. Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm sorry, it's already in there.
no, I'm agreeing. I think, and that maybe I should have listed that as one of the points of agreement. I think.
Sorry. Thank you, Dan. Also, the other suggestion I had was some sort of 360-ish review. And I know that those can be tricky. I've had those in other places in my career where they are not helpful. But I was wondering if there's a way to do a 360 is using I know I'm going to say it wrong, Qualmetrics or Qualtrics, which is replacing Panorama. But maybe there's a way to craft a survey that's doesn't get into too many details or specifics, recommendations about what the superintendent did wrong yesterday or something like that. But maybe would be just sort of to take a sort of a general, maybe the questions in that could be devised. So it's just sort of like, well, is it going well or not? You know, some sort of a general feedback from teachers or principals to say, yeah, it's okay, or hey, this is really not going well, just something 360-ish in the interim, not necessarily at the end of the year, but just to sort of see if things are tracking well or not. And so that's just a suggestion to try to avoid some of the 360 trip ups that can happen, but something general, but I don't know.
Do you thoughts on that, Kendra?
Yeah, so I agree with the 75%. Again, as a school board, this is why we exist. And we should be ensuring that we are evaluating the superintendent and holding this is the way of holding the superintendent accountable, right? But also, I think that to this point, it aligns with our goals and guardrails, right? And that's not something that we as a board just decided upon, but this is also something that the community has decided upon. So I think it creates that alignment in that sense as well. I agree with you about having those interim conversations, which we discussed at the first, I think, meeting, where we were talking about how to construct those goals and having those regular conversations to get that feedback and about progress and what we think is going well, what areas can be improved upon. And then I also agree in terms of identifying a way to have some type of survey language as well, right? So it gives that balance. And if I'm not mistaken, correct me if I'm wrong, Chair Lindsay, I think the previous superintendent had kind of a balance of both, where it was focusing on these specific metrics for student outcomes, but also there was room for surveys to be included and aligning it with the state standards for superintendent evaluation, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, that's correct. And I think my recommendation, I'm going on first names, Kendra and Jim, if you like, but you do you, and I will do. I was going to say, I think that finding the sweet spot with this is like enough clarity and enough things in writing that the basics will always be there, but enough flexibility that future boards and superintendents can adapt. And so I think the thing, having a floor of at least 75% of the evaluation needs to turn on how kids are doing. And with that other 25%, we could be explicit and say that may include forms of the 360. It may include forms of survey feedback based on superintendent standards, as approved by the board with the superintendent's input by that October date of each year. The thing on the 360 that has always tripped me up in the past is the publicness of it. Like whatever it is will wind up in the newspaper or on the news. And so it's even if it's in the middle of the year, even if it's just data, and we may decide we're fine with that. But I think it can go in good ways and not good ways.
Yeah, I'm not really, I think if we can craft the survey in a way that is somewhat general, then I'm not so worried about the public seeing that. I think, don't we share the panorama data publicly?
Yeah.
It's already, so.
It's great. That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. So let's try to do just maybe one more of the areas where we disagree. And then I want to make sure we have some time for hearing of the public, for Innovation Council, for audit policy. Okay, but okay. Well, we hit transportation a little bit. So just to synthesize what we've got so far, we've got alignment from all board members on date, on collaborative goal setting, on having goals voted and approved in public, on having a check-in halfway through. The consensus on this committee is to have the 75% floor on student outcomes and to say explicitly in the policy that the remaining of the evaluation can include components like a survey, a 360, the Ohio State superintendent standards, those kinds of things. Am I capturing that correctly? Okay. So last one I wanted to do, I think the draft also says very clearly that let me read it. It says, this is in part 2 where it says content. It says, at a minimum, these objectives will include measurements of system-wide academic, financial performance. And then it says, and they will include goals that focused on improving opportunities for students of color and low-income students. That is new. That is not something our current board policy says. And it was an area where there was some pushback from some board members. I think that Eve in her email wanted to strike that part. I would like to keep that part. I think my rationale is Cincinnati Public Schools serves students who have traditionally and historically been underserved by our city's education system. I think we should be spending disproportionate efforts trying to improve opportunities for those students. I think we talk about doing that quite a bit. I think we should put it in policy that that's part of how we're going to evaluate the senior most, or one of the two senior most employees who work here. And so I think I could be wrong. I might lose this one, but it feels important to me. And so I wanted to talk about it a little bit.
I appreciate what you're saying and the intention of it. It may be that we just changed one word instead of they will include, they may include. In other words, it could be in this, they're talking about the 25% area.
No, like within the goals.
Oh, within the goals.
Need to include some explicit goals about improving educational opportunities for low-income students and students of color.
Do we create any unintended consequences of doing that? I'm just trying to think that through. I don't know if there's other comments about that, but.
I want to give Kendra first rights if she has something she wants to say, and if we can come back to. Take your time. Yeah. Yeah. Dan or Stephanie, do you, I don't see any like legal challenges with us doing that. Do we? I mean, like, there's no reason we couldn't have that in our policy, is there?
Not off the top of my head, no. One thing we wanted to point out was just for clarity, the version that the board's considering this morning is the is sort of took all of the changes that had been in the last version, the September version, accepted them, and the only red line is sort of what was new this month. So there may be parts of the old policy that, and I know at least one board member had said they wanted to preserve something from the old policy. I just wanted to make clear what we were considering today.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? We took, there's an original policy in September. There was a very heavy red line to that policy. We sort of accepted those changes, and these changes are just what's different from last month.
And I would just add that think of all of it as in pencil.
Exactly.
Whether it's red line or not, like none of this is being even recommended.
Right. We're just not yet, but yeah, that's right. I thought it would be clearer just to see the changes from last month.
Yeah, I'd like to think about this one a little bit more. Just to kind of think it through. I think I can see where the low income student part might make sense because there's such a strong correlation between if you look at a school where the predominant population of a school is economically challenged, that tends to be a school that has maybe needs more focus in terms of the academic outcomes typically. So think through it a little bit more. Does that make sense, Ben?
I follow.
Yeah.
I see it differently, but I follow.
Well, I mean,
yeah.
It's to your point that we've had in other conversations, for us to be an exception of that correlation it would be a goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Which I don't disagree with.
Yeah.
Yeah, I understand the rationale why it's here. And so I do agree with that, but I am trying to process and trying to think through as well, maybe how to make it more digestible. Still saying exactly or addressing what needs to be addressed there. and calling that out and elevating that, but I think maybe trying to find some
Something like
Language
historically
that-
underserved, or like, is that what you're
Yes.
thinking? Or?
possibly,
Yeah,
I mean, and I don't wanna water it down either,
Yeah.
but I think where it can be, again, that collaboration from all of us to maybe spend some time a little bit and, identify a way that I think honors everybody in addressing this particular area.
Listen, I think this is great. People know I'm very passionate about this particular policy, but I don't want to monopolize our time. And so I think what we did, I'll just name the things that came through the feedback that we did not get to, so people can be thinking about them for next month. And what I'd like to try to do is also sometime between now and our next policy meeting, just in a public meeting, share what this discussion has been, so people are scrubbed in on it and they can weigh in with more feedback. We're getting everybody's voice in there. So other things, we got to 360. Thank you for bringing that up, Jim. There was some disagreement about whether there needs to be a final evaluation that is approved by a public vote, or whether that can just be a discussion in executive session. We'll talk about that next time. There was some disagreement about whether or not, when the board approves the goals, the board should also approve how the final evaluation is going to be scored. Or whether that can be left kind of open. There was also disagreement about whether we need to include that infrequent scenarios section at the end, which we haven't really talked about yet. So we won't get to those today. We can pick that up next month. I just wanted to flag those issues as ones to think about. And I think if Mary or Eve, if you're watching this, I tried to, in the text you sent, I tried to pull out the issues that was behind that text and get that on the table. And if I missed something important, please tell me. And we'll make sure to pick it up next time. Okay, so next, we'll turn it over to Jim for the Innovation Council.
So, yeah. Thank you. I just passed this out this morning. Probably nobody's had time to read it. But I did want to thank Dan. I submitted a document to Dan, and he has recrafted it with some categorization in the document that I passed out, which is helpful to the process. But Dan, I had a question. I feel like this is a policy, I don't know, I wasn't really even expecting this to come to the policy committee when I started this. So is the process for getting an Innovation Council implemented, we set a policy and then we turn that policy over to the administration to run it? Is that basically the idea?
That I think depends on what the board's ultimate direction is.
Okay.
There are policies that are very much, or excuse me, there are committees that are very much a sort of function of board policy. The audit committee is a good example of that. There's an audit committee charter policy, which is actually on the agenda this morning. There are LSTMCs that are there's an LSTMC policy that defines what the composition of that committee is going to be, what their role is going to be, et cetera. So if that's the kind of council you had in mind, one driven by the board, it certainly could be. On the other hand, there are lots of committees that are outside of that direct purview of the board. They're not mentioned in board policy at all, but they still exist and maybe even originated with a board direction to. So it could be either.
Could be either.
It could be either.
So this, I certainly this would be a board direction. And I just leave it up to my peers. Do they want to have it be a policy that we establish like all of our other policies? I think it's probably fine to have it be a policy that helps get it out in the public and is a stronger way of knowing that the board approves of this. I think, correct, Dan?
It would, I mean, it certainly gives the imprimatur of the board's.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. Thank you. So the idea for this council is for a singular place within the district for new ideas to be funneled and vetted and hopefully get some strength to be implemented to make the district better or more efficient. And so I was thinking that the members of the council might, I don't think it needs to be too big, but I was thinking that members of the council could be a couple teachers, a couple principals, some people from the higher administration, and then some students and maybe a couple of parents. Not a huge committee, maybe 10 or 12 people. Otherwise, it gets a little bit unwieldy for the committee to function. But I also thought that the teachers on the committee could be recommended by the union. The principals could be recommended by the superintendent. The students could be recommended by some teachers or nominated, I should say, not recommended or nominated. But that way we could describe a process for having people get on the committee. And then I also think that we would need to get a little bit of outside training to the committee about innovation. The committee doesn't need to be the innovators. They just need to be the folks that can manage the process of getting new ideas vetted for feasibility, affordability, and those kinds of things. And so there would be required some training around that. I think I have resources at University of Cincinnati, and locally we could probably get that training very inexpensively or at no cost. And then, so those are just, I don't know if that's all captured here in this document, but that's kind of the idea. And then once these ideas came to the committee, they could, and with a little bit of training, then we could, try to get them through to make the district better or cheaper, less expensive, or whatever we can come up with. And the ideas could come from the public too. They're not restricted just within the district. So that's kind of the idea of this council. And so this document is just sort of a starting point. And maybe the thing to do is let everybody absorb this document and my comments, and we'll come back next time to see if we can make this something that's more final and more specific. Does that, Dan and Ben?
Yeah, I think we could either dig into some today if you would like, or if you would like to give people some time to sit with it and think about it, we can come back to it next time. I think either one.
I was just going to add that it's posted on the policy committee agenda now, so for the public to see as well. So
Okay, so help me understand what you just said, Ben, about now.
Oh, so I think I'm grateful for the work you put into this. You've been bringing it up for a while.
Sure.
And I'd like to make sure we get it some time. And so if you'd like for us to share some feedback and some ideas now, we can certainly.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And if you would rather let people think on it for another month.
No,
that's also totally fine.
Any feedback we want to talk about now would be great.
So I appreciate you for putting a lot of work and intentionality into this. And thank you for clarifying with Dan about if this was policy, if this was something that the administration would take on, because I was trying to discern whether this was actual policy or if it was in the House of Administration. So I appreciate that. I think this is really great. It reminds me of, if you talk about not only the LMNC, but I'm thinking about like the affinity groups that were started. This is what it kind of reminds me of. I'm wondering if this was, put into policy, or if this was an actual committee that was formed, do you think that it can take on things to the extent of like how we're doing the growth plan or the sustainability plan? Like would those type of ideas be funded through here, through this type of committee?
That's a good question. I forgot to articulate that. I think if it's a really big strategic issue, it's not for this council. I think this is more for tactical activities, day-to-day initiatives, day-to-day improvements. I think one of the obligations we have as board members is try to help the school district have continuous improvement. And I think this gets at that. But I think if it's a big strategic question, like, are we going to create a new school with a special curriculum or something like that? That is not for this committee.
So,
But I think this
can you kind of talk about those like tactical day-to-day?
We might need to clarify that in the document a little bit more to say if it's a big strategic issue, and the committee will have to use some judgment around that. But if the committee is transparent about what issues they're addressing, then the board can say, oh, that's one for us. We'll take care of it. It might be some collaborative decision-making on those ideas as to where they go. But I think the big strategic issues belong to the board. Does that make sense, Ben?
So I think maybe having some language that specifies that could be helpful.
Can you write that up, Stephanie?
Right on it.
already.
I had, Kendra, we do have other things. So I was going to share the same thought. And then the other scenario I wanted to consider is, you could imagine a situation where the Innovation Council wants to do X and superintendent wants to do not X. So who has final decision-making rights on whether or not something goes? And again, like if in theory, if the innovation is small enough, it really shouldn't matter. But some of the more interesting ones might actually be bigger. And so who has the final decision?
Well, I think the administration will be represented on the committee. And so if the whoever the superintendent delegates to the committee and the committee has a vote, then they'll be involved in the process, and hopefully it won't be something where there's try to get that conflict resolved within the committee.
But and hopefully in 9 out of 10 times that happens. But this would be I'm trying to force the scenario. I'm not saying I think it's good or bad, but if there's a scenario where, say, the assistant superintendent's on the committee and is outvoted by a group of students and a group of teachers and a group of parents, then tough noogies, as my mom would say, and you got to do the thing that the other members of the committee say.
I suppose if it's really an issue that's locked up, the superintendent and the treasurer could say, look, you might think it's feasible, but it's not. And I think they would certainly have the right to say that.
So I'm just wondering if there could, I have to agree with you.
Yeah.
If somewhere in the language, there could be for something to take off, it needs the committee's approval and the approval of the superintendent or something like that.
Or endorsement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had one other thought. Oh, can we add in definition, teachers, principals, students, and other committed to thinking innovation? Can we add parents?
Yeah.
Or family members?
Yeah, parents, sure, absolutely. Yeah, or family.
But then plan would be to continue to socialize this and come back with a discussion for next month.
Yes.
All right. Cool. And Phyllis, you can keep that on our list for next time. Okay. All right, everybody. It's 11, but I think we can make some decisions together. Let's do this. If you would like to, Rob, can you just explain? Well, we're not going to do hearing in public just a second, but can you explain the instructions real quick?
Yeah, if you'd like to speak during the speaking of the public session, please click the hand icon now. We will bring you over at the time by asking you your name and your association to the district.
Great. And so this will give you a chance to see how many folks we have. While we're doing that, Kendra, did you want to hit on any of the audit policy?
No, we can say regular.
Are you sure?
So we need to discuss, what
I was reaching out to her this morning because I wanted to just make sure I understood. I wasn't sure if she was going to come or if she had some things she wanted us to say. And it sounds like from what she said, she's going to get some things in writing to me, and she's fine with us taking it up next month. So, yeah, so I think we had this got on here for a couple reasons. Part of it was an assignment from the October 7th meeting, where there was a question about this employees and open enrollment, place of employment piece. And then also, I think Eve was wanting us to talk a little bit about what the extent of the district's responsibilities are around transportation and student safety. And then we had a speaker here last time who had some concerns about his particular kids and students with disabilities and riding buses together as siblings, I think. And so could Dan and team speak to some of those a little bit?
Yeah, so on the speaker who was here, the parent who was here from, I think, Dade or Montessori last month, I understand that as recently as this morning, there's that transportation has worked to resolve that situation with him. As a general rule, the concern he raised was that he has two students who had, I think, two different situations. One was a sort of typical student and the other was a student who had specialized transportation, and they were on two different routes. It used to be the case that transportation had a means of providing transportation on a space available basis. Understand that creates, what that means is that if there's an extra spot in the, let's say, specialized transportation van, and that doesn't just occur for special ed, it occurs for students in foster care. It occurs for students who are homeless, experiencing homelessness. There are lots of specialized transportation arrangements. Essentially, it enabled a family to get other kids on that specialized transportation who wouldn't otherwise be eligible. And that's what I understand the parent was asking about here. The downside to that is it can create problems on the back end, because when that space is not available, let's say from year to year, or if there is a new student who has a need, it ends up being very frustrating to parents. And so I know transportation has gone away from that in recent years. This particular situation was resolved. I know transportation was looking at a couple of other situations. But I think their preference is still to resolve those kind of situations on a case-by-case basis, as opposed to changing board policy.
And I think that's great, particularly because we were able to do something to be helpful for the parent who is here.
That's right.
And if people are watching this, and if you have a situation and would like to talk to us about that, our door is open. And I think we should treat those parents or families in the same way. And also, let's not unnecessarily create even more complications in our transportation universe than we already have.
Yep.
On that topic, the other two.
So the other one came up at the board meeting, I believe, on Monday. And if I understand the request right, it was a out-of-district family who had an in-district work address, perhaps, and there was a request whether transportation could be provided to and from that work address.
They're employed by the district.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a firm rule in policy that we have not, I think, deviated from is that if you are attending as an out-of-district student, either as an employed individual or an unemployed, not unemployed, a non-CPS employee, that transportation is your responsibility. That's an open enrollment. If we were to change that, there would certainly be some cost involved. And so if the board were to, I don't have any kind of data on that, but that has been a firm rule for a long time. And that's really all I have to say. I understand why the parent requested it. And I know the superintendent mentioned that for high school students, at least, a Metro Pass can be purchased at a reduced rate, I believe she said. But I don't have any data on whether the feasibility or cost in changing that policy.
Great. Thank you.
Yep.
Any follow-up questions before we do the last one? Okay. Last one was extent of district's responsibilities.
Yeah, the policy I'd point you to for that
Can I
issue. Yeah, go
actually
ahead.
interrupt 1 second? Like, I understand that we could set a policy, right? But I have to imagine there's some state law or like some other law that like says what the district, like when the district's duty of care ends. You know, or is that totally unaddressed?
So I've been asked that 100 times since I've started. It is in my analysis. It's a negligence analysis. It's a reasonableness. The district always has a duty to exercise reasonable care with respect to transported students. So we try to say, and we do say in this policy, that
That's right.
a parent's obligation goes up until the point where the student is picked up. And then from there, the district we generally tell schools and transportation vendors, and that our obligation is to monitor and supervise students from the time they're picked up to the time they're dropped off. But there's still a reason. We always have a duty to act with reasonable care. So there's a difference between our obligation with a high school student who's taken Metro to a kindergarten student who's nonverbal, autistic, where we are physically putting the child's hand into the parent's hand at a drop off. And that's the reasonable care in that setting. It's a lot different for a high school student who's taken Metro. So that's where I think there's some vagueness and intentional vagueness in this policy. But this is the policy I'd point anyone to who's asking questions about, kind of our obligations versus a parent's obligations, et cetera. Glad to answer any questions, but it's a big topic.
This is 8600.01.
8600.01.
Yeah, and is there like a particular language in this that you would point us
The
to?
Board of Education must ensure that all reasonable steps are taken to ensure student safety and supervision of students during transit to and from school.
So all reasonable steps.
Yep, that's
Yep.
right. And then the last line says parents and guardians of students being transported are advised that parents and guardians are responsible for their children's safety and well-being until they board the bus or van for departure, and again when they return to their drop-off location. So that sets the sort of guidelines, but within that, there's variables to the standard of care, I would say.
Got it. Any other questions for Dan? We're not charged with making a decision or recommendation on this. I think what Eve was wanting us to do was to follow it up, get clarity on what it is. She had some other language, which I will not repeat. We're going to move on. Next topic. Okay. So, how many speakers do we have, Rob? Any in-person people who would like to speak today? Karen, was that yeah? Yeah. Please. What's our usual timeline here? Is it 2 minutes? 2 minutes? Okay.
Okay. Thank you. I had questions about the policy regarding the evaluation of the superintendent. And I think Julie wants to talk about how the assessment would happen and what the 75% score would be on. I think there was some suggestion that how those goals would be scored should be made transparent, because of course that's what it's all about. But Julie will speak more to that. I guess my question was about the infrequent scenarios, and I wondered, would the current interim superintendent be subject to this year? No. So I also wonder kind of if it's necessary, in my view, to talk about infrequent scenarios. It seems to me that if the policy as drafted says if the board doesn't vote by the end of the first week in October to approve a set of performance objectives for the year, then if there were performance objectives last year, they continue with targets increased by 10%. That's a huge increase. And it feels to me like if the board doesn't set the objectives, then there's kind of it almost feels like a penalty for the superintendent to be responsible for enormous improvements. And my interest as a representative of the teachers is that of course redounds to the teachers. That's an enormous improvement to make, almost unheard of, I think. And so it feels like it puts the onus on the superintendent and the teachers for really the fact that the board hasn't developed the performance objectives. Okay, that's my.
Well, you got lots of time left. Anything else? That's okay. Okay, thank you. Great. Other speakers?
I would like to speak. I also want to talk about the evaluation of the superintendent, and I have been on district-wide committees with national professional evaluators for 30 years. I have really been involved with evaluations, and there are some things in here that I find really creating a toxic environment for many of our schools. For the performance objectives, the basis 75% of the overall evaluation rating, and I'm assuming that you're looking at report cards and test scores, but based on these scores, even because the tests are it's a result or a score based on one test one day. And that could be a child just says, I'm not taking the test today. And that happens all the time. But the tests are not always valid and reliable. And you will see that when you look at scores based on grade levels. You'll have students at 4th grade here for math, 5th grade here for math, 6th grade here for math, because the tests are not always aligned with the state standards. And as you have standards that may be changing or curriculum that may be changing, you may see dips and gains over a period of time. But what you really want to look at is over time, are scores improving? But the most important thing to me to improve test scores is to have a highly qualified teacher in every classroom. Right now, we do not have that. One, it's because of a shortage of teachers, but 2, it's because of the culture of our district. And to me, until we improve the culture in this district, that it is not this punitive push down from the top, which this creates. You're not going to improve the culture. And so we are going to be the practice district for teachers. They come here and they say, I have few years experience. I'm going to Sycamore, I'm going to Indian Hill, I'm going to Oak Hills, where they have a better culture for their employees. Smaller districts have better cultures. I'm not saying that we don't have to show improvements in test scores, but I'm saying that to have it 75% seems outrageous to me when there's so many other things that impact that outcome, and you can make the growth by making other types of improvements. Right now, because of our financial distress, we don't have as many reading specialists. We don't have as many math specialists. We don't have the professional development that teachers need to improve. There are so many, we have classes that don't have their paras within the class. They have over the limit without a para. All of those things impact student achievement. And to say that this is going to be 75% of the evaluation, I just don't see where there's so many unintended consequences to this policy, but I also see that it's not doing anything to really improve the overall rating of our district. There are student teachers that I've heard who are working in some of our buildings, and when they start hearing all of the paperwork that's being piled onto teachers, they're coming from Miami University. They're coming from Mount St. Joe. They're coming from local universities, career teachers, and they're like, this is not the job for me. And until we start looking at that, we're going to constantly have a churn. We have the lowest experienced teachers of all of the urban 8. When they looked at the urban 8, we have the highest percentage of teachers that are first year to fifth year. We also have the highest percentage of teachers 5th year to 10th year. Many of these teachers came in during COVID. They missed a whole lot of education during COVID when they were in college. And we are trying to help catch them up, but yet we don't have the money now for the professional development to do that. So I think that as a board, you have to really be really serious about this and not say, we want a 75% evaluation rating, a 75% of the evaluation rating, and it has to increase by 10%. Look, Walnut Hills is probably what, 25% of our high school students? They can't increase by 25% because they're already at 90-something%. SCPA, they can't increase by 10%. So how are you going to say overall you're going to have this increase of 10% when so many kids in schools cannot get the 10%? We have our fastest growing population is ESL students, and they come in, they're very low. It takes a few years for them to even get up to speed to even understand the language. And so are we saying that that's one of these subgroups that is going to have a negative impact? We're doing a lot more for our students who are ESL than other districts, but just 10 years ago, it was maybe 2% of our population. Now it's 16 or 17% of our population. We don't even have enough teachers and employees who can translate, who are Spanish speakers. So until we get all of that, we're not going to be able to maybe meet some of these. And maybe you need to think about what is it that we need to put into place so that we have the culture of a district to make all of these improvements. That's just my opinion.
Thank you very much. Mr. Jim, yeah,
Do we make comments at this point?
we
or no?
usually don't, but why not? It's Friday.
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple.
I will just, if anybody has to go because we're over, thank you for coming. And I'll try to get us closer to target time next time.
Just a couple comments. I thought earlier in the meeting, we already established that we were going to discuss infrequent scenarios at the next meeting. So it's open for discussion. So, and also I think one thing you might want to keep in mind is on the 75%. Those goals are set in collaboration with the superintendent. And so that is something that you should consider communication with the superintendent so that we get goals. Our intent is to have goals that are reachable.
That's right.
It's not, and
it's not going to be the test scores. Because I know that the last.
I think it will include that. I think it has to include that because that's a measure of how well this district is doing for the public and the taxpayers. But I do agree with you that I would like to include something where we're looking at scores over time, over a period of years. It shouldn't just be one point in time. We know that measurement isn't always the best. There's a relative performance and absolute performance, right? And the absolute performance, we are going to get measured against Indian Hill. We are, or high performing schools. So it's going to be looked at, but putting it into some relative position relating to our student body, like students that come in with out English language speaking skills, or or students that are already high performing that aren't going to be able to improve as much as, they're not, I take all of that into consideration, but I hear what you're saying, but I also, we very much will consider what you're saying. And I think there's an opportunity for you to get very comfortable with what we're doing, and we'll make sure that you are.
Well, the last time they had graduation goals over 2 to 3 years, like up to like 90-something%. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I mean.
I'm going to interrupt for just 1 second. If anybody would like to stick around and talk about superintendent evaluation outside of our meeting, you are welcome to do so. I'm going to head to my